Good Wednesday, everybody. Today we are going to lecture on, good Lord, by that light. Today we're going to lecture on the wrist joint. Okay, so what you have here is your cross-sectional circle of the wrist. Remember, the wrist is somewhat circular. So if we took a right wrist, laid it so that you could see the cross-section, this is what it would look like. The bilateral axis is here, AP axis is there. NA for the polar axis, in other words, you remember from 310, the wrist does not twist. So there will be no rotational muscles for the wrist joint. Only anterior crossing muscles, posterior crossing muscles, medial crossing muscles, lateral crossing muscles. We're going to have flexion pullers. Those are going to be our wrist flexors. We're going to have extension pullers, wrist extensors. We're going to have ulna deviational pullers, ulna deviators, and radial deviational pullers, radial deviators. So this is the first time that you're going to have muscles that sit the fence on an axis. You think about what that term means, sit in the fence. That means that, let's see, I'm sorry, I got caught up in whether I was recording or not. Sit in the fence means you can't make up your mind, right? You're not on this side, you're not on that side of any particular issue. Well, we're going to have our first muscles that sit a fence. You see that box of muscles that are on the AP axis? That means these muscles cross the wrist in a way where they neither are medial nor lateral. So all they do is they cross anterior, but they are neither medial nor lateral. That means they are neither ulnar nor radial deviators because they sit the fence. They're right on the AP axis. Okay. The muscles you're going to have to be responsible for are listed here: palmaris longus, flexor digitorum superficialis, flexor digitorum profundus, flexor carpi ulnaris, flexor carpi radialis, extensor carpi ulnaris, extensor carpi radialis, and extensor digitorum. Guys, a lot of these muscles are descriptive. Palmaris inserts on your palm and pulls your palm forward. Flexor carpi ulnaris, a wrist flexor that inserts on some carpal bones, and it's on the ulna side. And if you remember, your ulna side is pinky side, and that pulls in the direction of ulnar deviation. Ulnaris, ulna deviate. So a lot of these muscles are very easy to remember function because function is kind of in the name of the muscle descriptor. Okay, so that's a layout of the circle. Now I'm going to get into the specific muscles, and then we'll try to put it all together. Let's see. Okay. Make sure I get here. So all of these are uploaded for you guys on Moodle. Okay. So the first muscles we're going to talk about. Remember, the function at the wrist, you need two qualifiers. First of all, that muscle needs to cross the wrist. So it has to cross the function, right? It has to cross the wrist joint to pull on bones on the other side of the fence. So all of these muscles have to cross the wrist. And then to determine their function, it's where do they cross? How do they cross? Function is not about origin and insertion. Because as you can see, these first muscles we're looking at is just an example about origin and insertion. The origin of these muscles are all medial, but yet one of them functions lateral. Because it's about how that muscle crosses the wrist, not where it starts. Okay? So the first muscles we're going to talk about, they call it compartments, anterior compartments. So if you're in anatomical position, anterior is in the front. So these are all the front crossing muscles that are logically going to pull in the direction of wrist flexion. These are wrist flexors. First one, palmaris longus. Now, longus and brevis are a term you're going to hear a lot about. And longus and brevis are not descriptive. So you think of longus that's easy. Something's long. And brevis, I think it's Latin for short. Most all of these kind of terms are Latin. But it's not about the muscle belly itself. Longus and brevis, long and short, are descriptors of tendon length. So technically, a longus muscle has a short muscle belly because it turns in the inner stringy tendon soon, and then the tendon is very long. That might be a good question. So the palmaris longus, let's think about the descriptor. A muscle that pulls on the palm of your hand. In these cases, they're metacarpal, the palm of your hand, and it has a long tendon muscle that pulls on the palm of your hand. Now, notice the wrist joint right here. This is pinky side lateral. This is thumb side medial. Look how right in the middle this muscle crosses. Sit in the fence, right? Neither medial nor lateral. So the palmaris longus is a wrist flexor only, pulling in the direction of wrist flexion. It is neither an ulnar nor radial deviator. It's a wrist flexor, crosses in the front. Now, let's look at its neighbors, medial and lateral. You have two flexor carpi muscles in the anterior compartment in the front. They are descriptors of bones that they run along. You have your flexor carpi ulnaris and your flexor carpi radialis. Okay? Flexor carpi radialis kind of comes here into that second metacarpal and onto your carpal bones. And your ulnaris, I think, inserts onto your pisiform bone. Carpals, right? Flexor carpi. And then you have one that runs along the ulna and one that runs along the radius. These are one of them is anterolateral, the other is anteromedial. That's just multi-directional explanation. Antero meaning in the front, lateral for your radialis, and medial for your ulnaris. So these muscles are going to have two functions, as you're going to see in the circle. The flexor carpi ulnaris is going to be a wrist flexor and a wrist ulna deviator, meaning pulling in those directions. Your flexor carpi radialis is going to be a wrist flexor because of anterior crossing, and a radial deviator because of the lateral crossing. Okay, and again, we're going to look at the circles after and kind of show all that stuff, right? So these are the anterior compartmental musculature of the wrist. Now, I'm not getting into little intrinsical muscles. I'm just talking about the major players in terms of wrist flexor, wrist extensor muscles. Okay? Palmaris longus, flexor carpi radialis, flexor carpi ulnaris. And then you have some finger flexors. Take a look at your finger flexor. So you actually have a lot of different little muscles that interact with your fingers because of the dexterity. You need some intrinsic muscles for fine motor, fine movement. But then you need big, powerful muscles that influence the wrist in terms of fingers. Because when you grip things, when you squeeze, a lot of times the wrist needs to maintain a neutral posture. We call it rigid links in biomechanics. So in other words, when you're grabbing onto things, this has to be very stable for you to be able to transfer that force and move it around and hold on to things. So it's behooving of some of our finger flexors not to be very intricate and dexterous, like intrinsic, internal muscles, but big, strong, extrinsic, coming from outside of the wrist and inserting into the wrist. And that's what these guys are. Flexor digitorum, superficialis, and profundus. Now, what's the difference? The difference is where they start and innervation, all that fun stuff. But really, it's how far do they come down into the fingers. So the superficialis, as you can see, kind of inserts here. These are proximal and middle interphalangeal. So the superficialis will actually insert here. And you can see how they have like this little opening, this little sliver. And that's because the profundus passes through that little sliver and then goes all the way to this. I'm pointing on the back side, but this would be the So the superficialis is pulling here, and then the profundus passes through the little slit and comes all the way at the end. Now, the cool thing is that these muscles are finger flexors, yes. But to get to the fingers, they cross the wrist anteriorly. They cross the wrist in the front. So imagine if you had a string that went all the way to the end of your fingers, and that string started on your palm, well, all you would get is finger flexion, pulling in the direction of finger flexion. But the fact that the string starts from the forearm, crosses the wrist in the front, gets to those fingers, it's not only going to pull in the direction of finger flexion, but it's also going to pull in the direction of wrist flexion. And again, this is cool. When we're holding things like this, not only do we need to grip it, but we need to splint it, grip it and splint it. So those finger flexors can serve as a splint to prevent wrist extension, like when you're doing a curl, okay? Very cool concept. So flexor digitorum profundus, flexor digitorum superficialis. These muscles kind of average out. They cross the wrist centered on the axis, so there's going to neither be ulnar or radial components to it. It's just going to be an anterior crossing muscle pulling in the direction of wrist flexion. Now, I'm going to show you when we get into wrist extensors that you only have one extensor, but yet you have multiple flexors. And the reason is because it takes a heck of a lot more force to grab on and hold on to something. Like imagine picking up a water bucket full of water. It would take a heck of a lot more force to hold on to that water than it would be to let it go. It doesn't take a lot of force to let go. All you got to do is just use this one muscle to let the fingers go. How often do you use your extensors? You use your flexors a lot more to grip, grab, hold. Or another way to look at it is if you had a heavy dumbbell, if you had a 75-pound dumbbell, it takes more force to grip it and hold it than it does to drop it. Okay. All right. Let's go to the posterior. So the muscles that you're going to be accountable for in the posterior compartment, you have mirror muscles to the flexor carpi. So these are extensor carpi. How easy is that? Extensor carpi ulnaris and extensor carpi radialis. The extensor carpi radialis runs along the radius. Extensor carpi ulnaris runs along the ulna. Remember, thumb is always going to be lateral. Pinky is always going to be medial. So if these muscles run along the ulna, which is the pinky side, they're going to be ulnar deviators. And if they run along the radius, which is thumb side, they're going to be radial deviators. And then you have your extensor digitorum. So again, a muscle whose sole job is to extend the fingers, but because it crosses the wrist posterior to get those finger extensors, when it pulls in the direction of finger extension, it also pulls in the direction of wrist extension. Okay? So that's why the extensor digitorum is a wrist extensor, because it crosses the wrist posteriorly, crosses in the back. Okay? All right, let's put this all together. Oh, also, you're going to see some other muscles in here. It's not that they're not important. It's not that you're not going to learn them in graduate school. It's just for the purposes of a undergraduate biomechanical muscle function class. I'm trying to give you the muscles most involved in major joint motions and not the intrinsic little ones, little helpers, okay? Going to get to that. All right, let's go back to your circle. All right, so once again, the circle as a mechanism for learning the material. You can do this a number of ways, and this is how I'm going to help you. I'm going to teach you how to answer all of the function questions just by seeing your circle. And then I'm going to come down here to the individual muscles and review the specific functions of each muscle. So that way, maybe you want to learn it like this. Maybe you want to put muscle with all of its functions, or maybe you want to create lists. Hey, that's all up to you. Just want right answers, okay? Who are the wrist flexors? They are all the muscles that sit in the front of class. In this view, the top of class, right? The anterior part. So your wrist flexors, not even looking at the board. Your palmaris longus is a wrist flexor. Your flexor digitorum, superficialis, and profundus are wrist flexors. Your flexor carpi ulnaris and your flexor carpi radialis. Who are your wrist extensors? Extensor carpi ulnaris, extensor carpi radialis, extensor digitorum. Who are your ulna deviators? Well, those are the pinky-sided muscles, the ones that run along the ulna. Flexor carpi ulnaris, extensor carpi ulnaris. And again, the beauty of having these muscles work together is that you have a flexor working with an extensor, and they cancel out each other's sagittal to pull in the same frontal. The lateral flexor works with the lateral extensor to cancel out in the sagittal and pull together in the frontal. The same goes for the radial deviators. These are radial crossing muscles, thumb crossing muscles. You have a flexor carpi radialis and an extensor carpi radialis. They cancel out each other's sagittal and pull together in the frontal. Okay. So these muscles would be used if you're like holding a gallon of milk, right? If you're holding it by the handle, you would need radial deviators to prevent ulnar deviation. If you're hitting the hammer and you're trying to generate that extra bit of ulnar deviation faster than what gravity can offer, you're going to be using your ulnar deviators, flexor carpi ulnaris, extensor carpi ulnaris. Okay. Other ways we can talk about the circle. What is the function of the extensor digitorum? Wrist extensor. What about the palmaris longus? Wrist flexor. What about the flexor carpi radialis? Wrist flexor, radial deviator. What about the extensor carpi ulnaris? Wrist extensor, ulnar deviator. Right? Make sense? So that's function question. What direction of motion does it pull in? Let's review if you want to add it to the side here. Palmaris longus, wrist flexor. Flexor digitorum superficialis, wrist flexor. Flexor digitorum profundus, wrist flexor. Flexor carpi ulnaris, wrist flexor, ulnar deviator. Flexor carpi radialis, wrist flexor, radial deviator. Extensor carpi ulnaris, wrist extensor, ulnar deviator. Extensor carpi radialis, wrist extensor, radial deviator. Extensor digitorum, wrist extensor. Cool? All right. Now, let's get into some practice. Let's pull up some exercises. Okay. Let's do some stretching exercises first. Okay. Let's do some stretching. So A, what group of muscles would I be stretching as I flex? If I flex my wrist, I'm going to be stretching the extensors. Who are the extensors? Extensor digitorum, extensor carpi radialis, extensor carpi ulnaris. Okay. B, I extend. Who am I stretching? Stretching all the wrist flexors, palmaris longus, flexor digitorum superficialis, flexor digitorum profundus, flexor carpi ulnaris, flexor carpi radialis. Okay. Let's see. Once again, wrist stretches. If I flex, I'm stretching the extensors. If I extend, I'm stretching the flexors. Okay. Let's check out this exercise. Now, again, this is why I try to preach. We don't associate muscles with motion. Look at that thing, wrist flexion exercise. Well, If your exercise was just wrist flexion, how the heck are you going to reset it to do another rep? You're going to have extension. So technically, the true thing here that's consistent no matter what is wrist flexor exercise, meaning that regardless of if you have flexion or extension, because of the external forces trying to extend you, you're working the muscles that pull in the direction of wrist flexion. Who are those wrist flexors? Palmaris longus, flexor digitorum superficialis, flexor digitorum profundus, flexor carpi ulnaris, flexor carpi radialis. Cool. Right. Let me try to find a wrist exercise. Oh, I'll tell you what, why don't we do this? Okay, let's do this. Okay, so your question is, if let's infer he's not moving. I know he is because we can see the blur, but let's say he's just holding those dumbbells there for the picture. Would he be using radial deviators or ulnar deviators, isometric work or isometric contraction to maintain the position of the wrist? Press pause and try to figure that out. Radial or ulnar deviators? Okay, if you press play, the answer is he's going to need to recruit radial deviators. External force is trying to ulnar deviate his wrist. He needs radial deviators to prevent that ulnar deviation. Who are the radial deviators? Flexor carpi radialis working with extensor carpi radialis. Canceling out at the sagittal, summating together in the front. Cool deal? All right. So that is the wrist musculature lecture. Those are the muscles you're going to be accountable for. Who is all in the groups? What are the individual functions of each muscle? How do you stretch them? What positions do you need to put the wrist to lengthen those muscles? All right. All right, guys. This again is Wednesday's lecture, number 1. I'm going to post the elbow and radial ulnar joint